From amazing pilots saving their passengers to lone survivors of horrific tragedies. Stay tuned to number 1 to find out who masterminded a terrorist attack only to remain the sole survivor. Number 10. Captain Tadeusz Wrona and Flight 16. On November 1, 2011, a flight leaving Chopin Airport in Warsaw encountered a hydraulic leak so bad that it took out all 3 landing gear, essentially meaning that the wheels would not deploy when they were going in for a landing. Luckily, the plane had Captain Tadeusz Wrona at the wheel, and he devised a plan that he hoped would save them all. After wasting fuel in an attempt to get the plane to lower its gears and slow down a bit, he radioed air traffic control and had them evacuate the airport and brought the plane in for a belly landing. Although the plane was damaged beyond repair in the landing, no passengers or crew died or were even hurt in any way. All that, and they even managed to evacuate the plane in just 90 seconds after landing. Number 9. United Airlines Flight 232. On July 19, 1989, Flight 232, bound from Denver to Chicago, encountered a problem that was deemed almost impossible to occur and had no official explanation on how to correct it once it did. About an hour after the plane took off, a fan disc in the tail of the plane broke and sent pieces of metal throughout the rear of the plane, severing all 3 of the plane's hydraulic systems. What this meant is that the pilot had essentially no control over the plane at all. When air traffic control was asked for a suggestion, they were left scratching their heads. Luckily, between the flight's 4 pilots they had on board, they managed to coax the plane into Sioux City, Iowa by using the plane's engines to steer it most of the way. On approach to the runway, they came in too fast and crash-landed on a runway, bursting into flames, and unfortunately killing over 100 people. However, the pilot's quick thinking in a unique situation saved the lives of the other 185 passengers on board. While you're watching these amazing stories, take a moment to like this video and don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. Number 8. Captain Shorn's Timer. On April 28, 1988, a strange disaster hit a Boeing 737 en route from Hilo to Honolulu. Midway through the flight, part of the first-class section's roof was blown off, buffeting the crew and passengers with icy winds and depriving them of oxygen. More interestingly, there was no real plan in place for such an eventuality, and Captain Robert Schornsteimer had to work purely off of his gut feelings and bravery to get his passengers to safety. Amazingly, his own personally made-up plan worked, and when he eventually touched down, only one of his crew members had passed away from the incident. Although 65 of his 89 passengers were injured, they all survived to take a boat over the plane next time. Interestingly, or scarily, inspections on the plane deduced that the incident was caused simply from corrosion and natural wear and tear on the plane from its serving in a coastal environment. Number 7. Sergeant Charlie Schaub and the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. Back in 1972, Sergeant Charlie Schaub was given a mission to support the Allied forces at the Battle of An Loch. They were warned that they would encounter enemy fire and that the rounds would be able to reach their plane. On approach to the drop zone, they did in fact take on heavy fire and were hit multiple times, killing the flight engineer and setting crates of ammunition on fire. When Sergeant Schaub tried to jettison the load, he discovered that the electronics had been shot out, leaving him no other choice but to cut the pallets free by hand. Luckily, as he did this, the crates flew out of the aircraft and exploded mere feet from the cargo door. Despite the bullet holes and the fact that the plane was on fire, he managed to land the plane and was given the Air Force Cross for successfully saving the plane and making it back in one piece. The plane was actually even repaired and put back into service before being retired only in 2011. Number 6. Captain David Cronin, Flight 811. On February 24, 1989, a flight going from San Francisco to Sydney suffered a problem, one which is seemingly commonplace in any moving containing airplanes. Shortly after takeoff from a stopover in Honolulu, one of the plane's cargo doors suffered a failure which caused decompression in the plane. Within minutes of the decompression, part of the plane was torn away, taking several rows of seats with it. And despite this being the opening scene from many a movie, Captain David Cronin managed to land the plane back at the Honolulu airport, even with the gaping hole in the side of the plane, and the fact that most electronics were knocked out. The flaps on the plane were only slightly damaged though, and he managed to turn the plane around and head it back to Honolulu. Cronin landed the plane still doing 200 knots, but managed to stop it in time and saved 337 out of his 346 passengers on board. It's still considered a major air disaster to this day, but if it had not been for Captain David Cronin, the situation could have been far worse. Number 5. Captain Chelsea Sullenberger versus a flock of geese. On January 15, 2009, Flight 1549 took off from New York en route to Washington, with Captain Chelsea Sullenberger as their pilot. Just a few minutes after takeoff, however, the plane came into contact with a flock of geese and sucked a few of them into the engines, immediately cutting all of them out and setting them on fire. Unable to reach the nearest airport, Captain Sullenberger made the decision to ditch the plane into the Hudson River. Amazingly, he managed to land the plane in the river with only 5 people being seriously injured and no fatalities. According to witnesses, the captain was even the last person off of the plane, ensuring that every one of his 155 passengers disembarked safely from the plane and the frigid waters. After the incident, he and his crew were all awarded Master's Medals from the Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators in recognition of their bravery and achievement in the face of such a crisis. Number 4. Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. On April 17, 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 suffered an extremely rare airplane malfunction while in the air. The engine on the left wing suffered the worst type of engine failure, which means that it essentially blew up mid-flight, spraying shrapnel through the windows of the plane and causing the cabin to depressurize. One woman, Jennifer Riordan, was sucked through the hole caused by the debris. Despite passengers' best efforts to pull her back in, she was unfortunately killed by the incident. 7 other people also sustained mild injuries from the shrapnel. Fortunately, however, the pilot was Tammy Jo Schultz, one of the United States' first ever female pilots for the Navy, and one of the first to ever fly a tactical fighter. She managed to arrange that they land at the Philadelphia International Airport after the incident. Using her years of Navy experience, she managed to land the plane successfully without losing any other passengers. Number 3. Francesca Lewis, saved by luggage. So far, all of the entries on this list have been about pilots doing their best to ensure the safety of their passengers. Now, we're going to look at passengers who survived incredible odds. 12-year-old Francesca Lewis was vacationing with her friend Talia Klein and her family in Panama when their little Cessna crash-landed into a volcano, killing all on board but Francesca. Not only was she the only one to survive the impact, but did so after being trapped for 2.5 days with no food or water. She was pinned upside down in her seat, dressed only in a shirt and shorts, and survived only because the luggage had fallen on her and insulated her from the freezing temperatures outside. Amazingly, she suffered no broken bones, and the only signs of what had happened were a few bruises and scratches on her. Just 3 days after she was recovered, Francesca was cleared to go home. Number 2. Cecilia Sicken, the 4-year-old lone survivor. Back in 1987, Northwest Airlines Flight 255 was involved in one of the worst aviation accidents ever, one in which 154 people on board the flight and a further 2 people on the ground were killed. The plane went down just a few minutes after takeoff and crash-landed on a highway. Amazingly, however, only 4-year-old Cecilia managed to survive the accident. She had fractured her skull, broken her leg and collarbone, and received third-degree burns. But she still survived the ordeal. Unfortunately, both of her parents and her brother were also on board the plane and were killed in the accident. Her name was not released after the accident, and only a description of her appearance was released to the public. Luckily, this was enough for her grandparents to identify her and take custody of her. And 25 years after the accident, In 2012, a documentary called Lone Survivor tracked her down. For the first time since the accident, she spoke out about the experience. The documentary also tracked down another 13 people that were the only survivors of their respective accidents to tell their story. Number 1. The Miss Macau Hijacking. Way back in 1948, the seaplane Miss Macau, while en route to Hong Kong from Macau, was involved in the first ever commercial hijacking. As the plane flew over the South China Sea, 4 men attempted to take the plane by ordering the pilot to surrender the controls. A struggle ensued, and the hijackers ended up killing both pilots and sending the plane into a nosedive. Out of the 26 people on the plane, only one survived, a Chinese man named Wang Wu, who was found floating unconscious by some fishermen. Wang Wu admitted to be the kingpin of the hijacking, and that their plan was to hijack the plane and hold the wealthy passengers for ransom, although some believe that they were also after the gold bullion that the plane often carried. Surprisingly enough, despite being the leader of the hijacking and the fact that 25 people died as a result, he was given only 3 years in jail for his crimes. This likely makes him the first and only person ever to be the only survivor from a flight that was then jailed after the ordeal. Tell us what you think about these amazing stories of survival in the comments below, and take care.